The topic today is enhanced wellbore placement. And what we're interested in, particularly with Corva, is this multidisciplinary approach. Traditionally, from a directional drilling standpoint, you essentially follow a line. But is that always the best line? So what I'm going to talk about today is actually treasure hunting in the unconventionals. In our opinion, there's a lot of opportunities that are being left untapped. There's a lot of ways of placing the wells a little bit more efficiently that aren't currently going into. So when you look at performance, you're looking at essentially two facets. There's the operational efficiency for both the drilling and the completions element to it. But probably more important, because at the end of the day, this is how the bills get paid, is the production and performance. And what we're going to talk about is the fact that where you place the wellbore within the reservoir is probably the single most important facet of any other operational consideration that you can make. It's actually the actual placement within there and staying within a particular part of the reservoir is what drives the production performance. Because that's what the shareholders actually want. They want a consistent, reproducible results. You know, the big problem from an investment standpoint for much of the unconventionals is the inconsistent production results. Historically, it had been inconsistent drilling performance as well, but I think we've, for the most part, solved that problem. There's a couple people shaking their heads, not completely yet, but it certainly has improved over the last 3 or 4 years from a day standpoint. But the challenge still remains in a wide range of production results. So bear that in mind, even though we're talking about wellbore placement, even though this is a drilling session, it's actually about the production and getting consistent results. So what we're looking for is to be able to get a greater, more consistent production result, and at the same time have the operational efficiency as well. And I think that's the important point that I'd like you to remember, is that these two goals are not mutually exclusive. You can have higher production results and still have the operational efficiency. And in fact, in my experience, they actually augment each other, because the fact that you're drilling a more precisely placed wellbore, you're actually doing away with a lot of the operational issues that impact performance. So the first step of that is actually identifying what the reservoir sweet spot is. There's a misconception, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes some more, but that it's what I call the hand grenade approach to completions. It's that the frac's going to sort everything out. It doesn't matter, all you got to do is get close, and the frac is going to sort it out. Well, I don't think that actually bears out. The frac is not as geometrical as people think. You know, it looks like this nice elliptical shape. It couldn't be anything further from the truth. So that is really the point of this, and I'm going to emphasize this again. It's actually the wellbore placement and where you are makes the biggest impact. Building a map. Once you've identified that spot, where is it? Where is it within the reservoir sequence? What are those zones that, and the drilling parameters, the measurements that take place there? So what does it look like when you are drilling through those zones? I'm going to emphasize that a little bit more later. Mapping while drilling, the new MWD. You can actually be mapping the reservoir as you're drilling through it. And we're talking about in real time at the bit, not just further back from the gamma ring. The being able to land and place the wellbore, we're getting into the operational elements of this now. But there are ways, when you know the spot that you want to land into, that you can set yourself up directionally in order to be able to land. What we're talking about is essentially landing within a 6 to 8 foot window and staying within it for 80 to 90% of the well length, of the lateral length. Now that sounds to be like quite a chore, But if you have things set up properly in advance, in some respects, it's actually easier to drill that way than to go looking and bouncing through the reservoir trying to figure out where you are. And that's what we're trying to do, is eliminate what we call marker hunting. Marker hunting is when you actually have to drill out of the reservoir in order to tell that you were in the reservoir to begin with, which doesn't really make sense. But I don't know, is there any geologist in the room here? But you were shaking your head in agreement with all the other things, so you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Because if you're just using the gamma ray, 20, 30, 40 feet behind the bit, you're out of your zone just to prove that you're in it. And that's what we're trying to do, is eliminate those types of inefficiencies. Because from a directional standpoint, if you pop out of the zone, it's going to take you 250 to 300 feet to get back into it, even if everything else goes good. So you're looking at eliminating a lot of that better part of the reservoir. And then steering to the formation directional response. Traditionally, we've placed these wells by the gamma ray. But you can actually know what type of rock you're in by how it's drilling. Not only by how it's drilling, but how the directional response for the BHA is going. So you can be in a rock that is building and turning to the left at 1 degree per 100. Well, that's going to be consistent. That as long as that formation stays in a reasonably similar fashion, that response is going to stay the same. So you'll be able to understand what zone you're in by how it's drilling. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. What essentially we're talking about is building a treasure map. We want to use a cross-discipline approach to be able to correlate to wellbore placement. I was very interested in the previous speaker when he's talking about analyzing the offset wells. That data is important, not only from a geometric standpoint, but also from a correlation standpoint in terms of what type of drilling response you get. So you can actually analyze offset well data by the drilling responses, use that and correlate that, and use that as a correlation tool to delineate and map the zone that you're trying to stay in. Now that's kind of a unique approach, and it really takes this multidiscipline understanding in order to be able to affect that. Then we need to create a map so that we stay in what we call the production sidewalk. Let me talk about the sidewalk here for just a minute. You're going to see some more data on this here as I go on. But the production sidewalk is an area that's identified by the productivity from a well path in terms of what percentage of the well path is within that zone. So if you're going up and down within a 60-foot window, in almost every unconventional area, you're probably going through 5 to 10 different layers. And those rock properties are not the same. They're dramatically different. 2, 3, 4,000 PSI and compressive strength difference. So they're going to have different characteristics. They're going to drill differently. They're going to frack differently. And they're definitely going to produce differently. And that's what our supposition is that we believe that there are sweet spots or these production sidewalks within the zone. And here again, I'll elaborate on that. So once we identify that, we can execute the plan. And what our prediction is that you can get 1.5 to 1.8 times the production for 0.8 to 0.9 the cost. And this is simply by staying within these more discrete zones at a higher percentage, and that it is more efficient to actually try to stay within those zones instead of bouncing around. So that's where these numbers come from. So what is the process? How do we do that? You have to have an analysis of what that production sidewalk is. And this is actually just a statistical analysis of offset information. We believe we can get to a point where we can actually do a production prediction based on your real-time data. What percentage of the well path that you are within that particular zone? And we can do a production while drilling forecast. If there's enough offset data, and this is just a statistical approach. This doesn't ignore the geology, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not just a geological process. It's actually a positional and statistical approach that correlates your position within the reservoir with the production. And what we've discovered is that there's a very high degree of correlatability with that across multiple reservoirs. It's not just in one area that this works. This is production driven, as I mentioned, and it's a data science approach. So you can understand why I'm here. You guys have the information. Corva has the information. They have the platform that enables us to do this. I introduce Joe Doucette. He's there in the background. He's the one who doesn't look like a directional driller, but he actually is. And he's been the brainchild behind a lot of these processes. It's been his experience that goes into it. So he'll be the first to tell you he's not a geologist, although he's learned a lot about geology. But this is just a statistical approach. This is numbers. You know, I often introduce him. He's the only directional driller I know that has a degree in actuarial science. So obviously he's a numbers guy. So and I keep emphasizing this because this isn't just based on experience or feel. There's actually data behind this. So again, this is why we're interested in working with Corva on getting these things out. So we create the roadmap for these zones. And then a lot of times where these concepts and these ideas fall apart is actually in the execution, because you have to take this concept and take it into the field and then the hardest part is convincing the company man that you were actually doing something right to get this executed. And this is where this has been a unique process for us, in that we've been working with a small company. You don't have a lot of layers of decision makers to go through. And we've been in the position to be able to execute this, working very closely with the geologist on this, with the operational people in the field, with the mud loggers, with the MWD people, the drillers. And it takes that type of cohesive approach in order to execute this. And again, what we're looking at is 80 to 90% of a 10,000-foot lateral within a 6-foot zone. So that doesn't happen very often, because you have to be intentional about it. You have to understand what it is that you're looking for. So staying on the sidewalk, this is a nice view of the woodlands. So this is sort of what you're looking at from call it a seismic standpoint. And we start zooming in on the roadway. Well, now you're starting to see the features develop. So going from here, a larger geological picture, to now a little tighter geological picture. And in fact, this is our sidewalk. If you look at this roadway, you're looking at something about 40 to 50, maybe 60 feet across, depending on how much of the grass on either side you want to include. This is often the target that is given. The directional driller says, just stay in this 60-foot window and we're fine. Like I said, the frac's going to sort it all out anyway, right? But we really want to stay on this. This is 6 foot across, maybe a little narrower, but that's where all the money is. It's not in the grass. It's not on the main roadway. I mean, you'll get something out of it, but this is where most of the production is coming from. So let me revisit this analogy. We have this satellite view. This is our seismic again. See, that's our well path. Now, all you've got there, you've got your 60-foot wide window. You can see the road. You can't see anything else with seismic. And that's what it looks like. You come in, and that is the path that we're chosen to follow. But now if we look at this a little closer, now this is our geosteering cross-section. We have the different areas identified. There might be offset core data. There can be offset correlations that you can have, other wells in the area, varying degrees of information that can go back and forth. So now this is where we want to tighten things in and get closer. And you'll see how this goes back and forth. This is not an unusual log. This isn't unusual to see. You see where things pop out a little bit? That's where we've left the sidewalk. This just creates a visual of what's actually going on downhole. But again, this is cross-discipline. You know, most directional drillers don't have the privilege of getting this kind of data or this kind of understanding. They're just told, go up, go down, go right, go left, and then drill as fast as you can. The drill as fast as you can actually get you in trouble. So these are the different markers that go back and forth. And again, this is just a visual representation of what you're seeing downhole. It helps us to see it on the surface. But again, I'm going to emphasize the point. You have to leave the road in order to know that you're on the road if you're doing this from a conventional geosteering standpoint. The gamma ray is a good tool, but like I said, it's 30 to 40 feet behind the bit, and you're already off. Yep, and maybe a half inch on a good day, right? But this is what we're looking at, the directional driller's view. Now, can you imagine, walking on this sidewalk for 2 miles wouldn't be that difficult, assuming that you haven't overindulged in adult beverages while you're doing it. But getting these lines in when you're 2 miles underground, and then really that's what we want to stay within. Now, doing this, again with the gamma ray, very difficult to do. But if you closed your eyes and maybe you had a walking stick, as you're tapping along, you're going to know when you're on the sidewalk. You're going to know when you get into the grass because it's going to feel different. That's essentially what we're talking about. This is how operationally you can stay within these windows. So this is actually executable, but this is a different concept for most people. Many directional drillers, I won't say most, but many directional drillers can keep you within a certain area, but you just have to tell them where you want to stay and why. So if we include the frac stages in that, now this isn't an exact representation of the previous well, but it's similar. But here again, this gives you a visual, and this is assuming a homogeneous frac. But it gives you an idea of what we're actually fracking when we're going through these wells. And again, that 6-foot window, that's where the bulk of the production is coming from. So your production is going to be directly tied back to your percentage of the well bore within that window, on that sidewalk. So what happens when you stay on the sidewalk? This is actual data. This is public data. So we're not disclosing anybody's secrets. This does come from an unconventional area. And this shows you the distribution. This is the same area, 26 wells from the same area. Look at the production distribution. Now, oftentimes this is explained, well, there's good rock, there's bad rock, there's different things. This is the same area. Yes, there can be downhole complexities. I'm not ignoring that. They can be structural, they can be stratigraphic, but they're not this different. And again, this is the struggle that many people have in doing this. Now, you're going to see on these that this pattern, there's a big degree of difference in terms of what percentage within the production sidewalk that these wells actually were on. If you control the wellbore placement, these wells all have 94% within the production sidewalk. Look how tight those production curves are. I mean, they're virtually laid on top of each other. The same area, and these wells, these 4 wells here were not all in the exact same geographical area. They were spread out a little bit, just like the rest of the wells were. So there's no correlation, like these 4 wells weren't just in one distinct area of that formation. So if you look at this, here's 24-month production with the distributions. You see the 4 wells at the top with that tight distribution, and the rest of them. Turn this on its side. Look at the cumes. Not only are we talking significantly different and tighter production results, but significantly higher recovery factors. So this might not be the way you expected this presentation to go, because I'm talking about enhanced wellbore placement. But this is the bottom line. So as we build the map, you can do this seismic-wise, offset well data. You pull all the things together. That's the roadmap that you want right there. You now have a map that the directional driller can follow. And then these are the results. So you identify it. And again, it's a statistical approach using offset data. Again, it's why we're so interested with some of the things that we're seeing here today. Identify what that sidewalk looks. Then you have a guide down the path. You quantify the production or replacement correlation. Would be interested in seeing what the fracks, how the fracks go, how do the fracks pump off? Because we think there's going to be a correlation between the placement and that and what your completion results are too, in terms of executing them. So this must be a collaborative cross-discipline effort. And believe it or not, it's the directional driller who's going to make or break this. It seems funny, but he's the guy who's probably most responsible for doing it. Joe had put together a presentation, what we had about 6 months or so ago, on how he bankrupted Whiting, which isn't exactly what you want to hang your hat on, right? But what happened is that he figured out where the fastest drilling was, and guess what they did? They went down into that zone. Guess where the production wasn't? In that zone. Sometimes the best production